I'd like to extend a good evening to everyone. With presence on the Tayac ancestral tidewater lands, now known as Washington, D.C., and deepest gratitude, I welcome you all to the National Gallery of Art's 2023 Annual John Wilmerding Symposium on American Art and Community Celebration. And it really is a celebration and commemoration and remembrance of what our peoples carry with them and is expressed through the artists that come together this evening. My name is Gabrielle Tayac, and I am actually sitting on my ancestral lands tonight, which is also Washington, D.C. Piscataway woman and the Tayac people incorporated into our people, the Piscataway, in the face of colonial onslaughts and merged with us. And so we still continue here. And in Washington, D.C., we found ourselves and in the D.C. area along the Potomac River, the tribes down in Powhatan country and a little bit over onto the eastern shore of the Chesapeake, often found ourselves to be quite alone. And so when movements came into the DC area, especially in the 1970s, but also in the 1920s, and now surging forward into today, with this momentous exhibition, it brings this land and this ancestral activation back into fullest life. I'm a community engaged curator with a long career, initially at National Museum of the American Indian for 20 years. And then also come from a background as an activist scholar working on human rights and Native rights issues in North Central and South America. And now find myself as a public historian and professor at George Mason University, working with a diverse group of students. This evening's session is especially relevant to the ways that I've been thinking, and other conversations have come up about what does it mean to be an Indigenous scholar, a thinker, a community person, as has been said, a good relative, and to create ourselves as good ancestors. And that's what I am so excited and open to learning in conversation this evening. So we're here hand in hand with an extraordinary event, and one that's going on for a few months, but one that culminates in long lineages that each of our speakers are bringing with them, and also the 50 diverse living Native artists that are part of Joan Quick-to-See Smith's curatorial wisdom craft and powerful artistic legacy that she and many have manifested into this exhibit that's called The Land Carries Our Ancestors, Contemporary Art by Native Americans. I was thinking quite a bit about what do we mean by land? What do we mean by land? Land is not just what we walk on. Land is not just surface. In conversation with an elder activist, Casey Camp Hornet from Ponca Nation, she encouraged me to think about land as that which encompasses all the life sources and what can breathe in and renew ancient beings into our lives now. How it pervades and sustains all of us constantly and consistently. And what we'll see here in conversation with our three artists, scholars, and community-based knowledge carriers about how this has moved through Indigenous visuality. I'm really excited to be sitting beside three knowledge keeping and knowledge transforming artist scholars Each uniquely is dedicated to community education and growth. And so they'll be speaking about this process of what does it mean to be part of something. My colleague, Angela Gonzalez, a Hopi sociologist, speaks about, she says, being Native is not being part something. She speaks of it as being Native is being part of something. And so just what does it take to have this many living Native artists from across the part of Turtle Island, now known as the United States, coming together to speak through their brilliant works, and to understand that even within the title of the exhibition, the land carries our ancestors, that this defies and works through what we often see in conversations on art history and fine art, this dichotomy between contemporary art and ancestral knowledge. These works integrate worldviews immersed in spirals of time, depth, and space, established in relationship with and of land as life source. The exhibition promotes self-determination, truly inherent sovereignties in identity, practice, and expression. And so why is this stance so unique? Because we have seen multiple shows, exhibitions, projects with contemporary Native artists. First, I want to signal and really have us think about what does it mean when we have 50 people who are living, presenting their art in Washington, D.C. at this time. This is a tremendous convergence. And how they are developing their work substantively together in a conversation is a key piece. So critical and necessary in its point to see what our ancestors carried, what they were not supposed to have survived, and that the land herself, especially here in the place of the National Gallery, was meant to be bereft completely of us via policy design and also social practice. The concept of what Joan has done, Joan Quick-to-See Smith has done as a curator now, and as an outstanding, truly iconic artist as well, is that this has moved the process. It's part of the process of moving what we mean by curation from the 19th century erasure project to one that truly takes a sovereign curatorial ethos. It's one that we can see really bringing through to the point where we have this many people, these many creatives coming together at this point. Moving, I think, where we can see in art institutions with National Museum of American Indian right across the mall from National Gallery, really face to face of over 20 years, which also then comes from a groundswell of the work that has been carried in lineage by each of our speakers this evening. And artists truly have a specific and powerful role in so many ways. Artists can speak loudly, firmly, and intensively across boundaries that are internal and external. So with those thoughts in mind and so many more along the way, it's really my pleasure to introduce each of our artist scholars and community university leaders as well, who will be engaging with us. I'd like to introduce Keith BraveHeart, who is Oglala Lakota, who is a visual artist and arts educator. He serves as an associate professor of art at Oglala Lakota College. He is a citizen of the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. He earned his BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Just such a keystone location that has brought so much of this to life, right? We all carry these genealogies, of work. And also his MFA in painting from the University of South Dakota. Keith BraveHeart has worked with young Native American artists, grades 11 and 12 through the Oscar Howe Summer Art Institute at the University of South Dakota, supporting their experiences together with other local professionals, museums, and cultural facilities. His work within art and community is diverse and includes exhibition curation, arts and culture programming, engaged arts and community engaged arts initiatives. BraveHeart is committed to enriching and encouraging a tribal arts continuum across the Northern Plains region and expresses a sincere acknowledgement, I love this, of being a good relative. Sean Chandler, who has made art his entire life, having been trained as a painter at Montana in Bozeman. And he comes from an artistic family. So again, another lineage. He placed his promising artistic practice on hold to pursue an MA in Native American Studies at MSU Bozeman and an EDD, so an educational doctorate in educational leadership at the University of Montana, where he was the director of American Indian Studies at A'ani Nakota College on the Fort Belknap Reservation. A scholar at heart, he has devoted himself to language revitalization and American Indian Studies. John Chandler currently serves as president of A'ani Nakota College. He has received awards and exhibited at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, and the BraveHeart Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana. His work is in the collection of the Museum of Natural History in Paris and the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And finally, it's going to bring us home this evening is Gerald Clarke Jr., who is Cahuilla Band of Indians. He lives in the home his grandfather built around 1940 on the Cahuilla Indian Reservation. And so again, another family lineage of this brilliant work. And currently oversees the Clarke family cattle ranch. He holds a BA in art from the University of Central Arkansas and MFA degrees in painting and sculpture from Stephen F. Austin State University, which is located in Nacogdoches, Texas. A professor of ethnic studies at the University of California, Riverside. Dr. Clarke teaches classes in Native American studies and is a frequent lecturer speaking about Native art, culture, and social issues. So we have an incredible gathering of good minds and true hearts and great work. And we'll start off with you, Professor BraveHeart, if you would like to share your screen with us.
Thank you very much. And also good evening, good day to everybody who is joining us for this wonderful symposium. I was just looking at the runner show, so excuse that. My name is Keith BraveHeart. Very, very happy to be here and to also share some words that are representing for my family, my land, and also my culture and lifestyle of the Lakota people, but also a lot of us indigenous relatives, this concept of how we see one another as related, connected, and we can see beyond different kind of identity barriers sometimes as well too. But for a quick introduction into who I am more specifically, I come from this landscape of Northern Plains region, more so here in my homelands of the Lakota people, the Oglala Lakota. There is a lot more tribal bands that do call these landscapes home as well too, but this is where we have been federally recognized as this reservation land. But I've always seen it as just what it represents within the land itself, as the aesthetics, the beauty, and also some of the curiosities, maybe even the dangers, even some of the strengths and powers that reside within the land, and how I was a part of that, how I was ingrained with that. And eventually, when I had the opportunity to kind of start to critically think about identity through all my art schooling and art education, I really realized that it was always there in front of me all the time. The mirror was seeing myself in the Badlands. And it really was my backyard as well too. I do see my grandmother's home as being the kind of the staple, the really hub for where a lot of my nourishment took place for who I am as a person. The other photo on the right is an actual historical photo of one of my ancestors, and actually my namesake. That is our first grandfather, who was named BraveHeart. And so many generations later, I carry that last name now. But I know that I still can see who he was, and even across time, think about how am I connected to him, and how do I appear in front of who he is in memory and ancestry. So a lot of these concepts of identity really do shape my work and how I navigate throughout the Native arts scene. When I first ventured into education, academia, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I actually didn't really have a lot of ambition to really set out onto that journey early on in life. It actually came really at a pivotal moment, which was because of a really groundbreaking individual and really incredible artist that I'm going to highlight here in a moment. But what eventually occurred is I did go onto my own journey, and it led me to the Institute of American Indian Arts, where I was very happy to just gain that opportunity to soak it in, to really get insight into what is this Native art world that's so fascinating and incredible, but also all those relatives who were extended beyond my little reservation boundaries. But when I first got into this arts program down in Santa Fe, really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I kind of just tried it all, but what had really perked my interest at the beginning was photography. And I had a great time with the faculty there at IAIA, and I enjoyed this process of making traditional black and white photography. It was something that was pretty new to me, especially since I didn't experience that type of medium at home. And so when I got that camera in my hand, what I did is I just kind of started to share more of those moments that I saw intimately always, and things that I started to later understand that had profound presence. They were speaking visually about our omitted histories, our resiliency of being contemporary peoples, but also just opening up that opportunity for imagination to interplay with how art is a vehicle for communication and for engagement, for an experience. And so some of my photography doesn't really get seen and presented that much. It's really stashed away in the old student portfolio under my bed maybe, but I do want to show this one because it does speak to the land as well too, and it does come from a very significant spot here in our Pine Ridge homelands, where this beginning occurs for what becomes well known as the Wounded Knee Massacre. There's a lot of exploration that takes place for me throughout my arts journey. But eventually what happens is I find that painting is what I love the most. And so I put the camera down. I kind of really prefer more to be at the easel. And I start to really see what painting has to offer to me. And it's not because of a required course that I'm taking, but really because I'm surrounded by painting. It consumes my thoughts and my everyday because it's just there, it's available. And I'm very fortunate to be in Santa Fe and to have access to the museum in Santa Fe and see all these wonderful paintings that legacy artists have created. Amongst them, great names like Jean as well too, but other names that are very notable to a lot of us, T.C. Cannon, Alfred Youngman, and it just goes on and on and on, all the way up to my time when I was a student there with my colleagues, my peers, my good Kolas friends, who were always in the studio painting. And so that just made me feel like I needed to do that as well too, to try it out for myself. And when I did, I fell in love with it instantly. So I've never stopped painting. And I always tell people that painting is my heart. That truly is what keeps me alive in this world, in this time. And I will always paint regardless of whatever condition presents itself, that I will always make time to make paintings. Although I have to be honest that my schedule and time management has really suffered a little bit when I took on the full-time position of being an educator myself, which I didn't really expect to get into, but it happened, and I'm also thankful for it happening as well too. But there's a lot of my painting that I do share. It's just, I know I don't have a lot of time to go into depth with the painting, but again, this piece here speaks to land, speaks to what we were looking at within the articles of the Treaty of the Fort Laramie Treaty for the Sioux Nation in the US, and how they start to regard our reservation that will become our permanent home. And so as I started to understand a lot more of my history and a lot of policy and a lot of this just existence for Native peoples, I really found that the best way that I can make sense of it to me personally was through the expression of art making. And painting, again, was that preferred medium because it was just like it accommodates my urgency to be expressive quickly. I also got to highlight this moment here because this is really where I think I got the invitation to participate in the symposium panel, was through this encounter with Jean and Neil at the Institute, or the Oscar House Summer Art Institute, which was held at the University of South Dakota. And it's a long-lasting legacy as well too. It gets its namesake from the groundbreaker, our grandfather of modern American Indian art, is how he's credited, Oscar Howe, who was a Yanktonai Dakota, but also as we look at him more appropriately within the definitions of the Ochete Shakome peoples, we say Ohunktawana, but he comes from this homeland. He's also just referred to as a Dakota artist. And he was a very pivotal figure. He has a very great biography, but one of the incredible generosities that he presents that I truly think defines his legacy was that he stepped aside from this selfishness of being an artist to make time for investment in young artists, especially from these indigenous tribal homelands here in our Northern Plains region. And he offered them an opportunity to attend his Summer Art Institute, a little art camp. And he wanted to give them the resources they needed and also the cultural encouragement to start to pursue their own paths and define those paths for those who would be following. So he was truly holding a concept of a continuum, as he understood it, as how he inherited from his own ancestors. And I think he had the foresight to know that that is what he needed to give time to. And so education was really the core of that, that I think synergy, but also that generosity, just that humanity of who he was as a person, a good relative. And so it started in the 60s, and there's also a lot of history behind this institute as well. But this is the opportunity I received as a young high school student. And this is where I made that life-changing decision to go and find an arts program. And I didn't know that at the time there were also those that were dedicated exclusively to Native artists such as IAI. And so that put me onto that trajectory. And I was very fortunate as well too that every summer I get a return back to this Oscar House Summer Art Institute because of the faculty and the staff that were operating it, showing promise to me that I could maybe continue to take part in this, which is kind of like a special arrangement because it's primarily for high school students, but they allowed me to continue to come back and eventually rise in the ranks from student helper, student aide, all the way up to instructor, eventually even taking the role of coordinator and assistant director. And I've spent 14 summers as part of this Oscar House Summer Art Institute. And throughout that time, I had the luxury of just making art, having good materials to work with, but also really gaining this education of these artists that were important to my homeland, my region, but also to our larger, vaster Native art scene. And through that experience, I really did start to explore more of what could be these stories that I can tell, these images that I can portray artistically. And that led me to broadening my own horizons. As you can see that historical photo, it inspired me to think about sculpture, but really more so community engaged art. And that's kind of where I'm now settled into. Even in my education instructor role, I still try to bring that element of community engagement into the classroom. And that's what you'll see with a lot of my portfolio is just like me kind of sitting there and showing people how to do a process, explaining a little bit of context. and also encouraging and hopefully just inspiring maybe as well too. But really hoping to kind of break those barriers that art isn't exclusively for a special individual. It's for everybody. And that's the notion that we carry within our tribal homelands and our tribal communities. And so you can see some of these images that just kind of survey a lot of the work that I did. I really got a good start up in Minneapolis, and I did a lot of partnerships up that way. But I also tested the whole waters with how all these different audiences and students could be, and to see for myself if education was truly where I needed to be situating myself. And I think that I'm happy to be an educator. I'm happy to see these looks on the participants' faces, my students' faces, but also my community, my relatives. I'd like to see when art speaks something to them. So that's a little bit about myself, and I'm going to now turn it over for this time to Sean. So thank you, everybody.
Well, hey, Nanisa Nitha Walk, Nanana Oninen. I'm Sean Chandler, and I'm from the White Clay people up in north central Montana. And it's an honor for me to be here. And yeah, a little bit, I want to back up on to emphasize definition and how, and that's what I do in a lot of my work, and in my not just in my educational career, but in my art career. I want to emphasize it's who had the power to define us, and what were we defined as? Well, for ourselves, we define at my home, we define ourselves as Oninen, White Clay people. In history books, we're called Grovon. And there's another tribe that's located on a reservation, and they're Nakota, or the people, and history books are called Assiniboine. And we're there's a little map there on of Montana. We're in north central Montana, and our northern border is about 40 miles from Canada. And we were rounded up there about 1888. And another thing I like to look back on is the treaties, what gave us our, what established this relationship with the federal government, this acknowledgement that we are a sovereign nation. And in my tribe, the Aani, our treaty that we signed was in 1855. At the time, we were allies with the Blackfeet, so they considered us part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And I just, want to talk about the, that not just these treaties, but the agreements that came later, and the topic of education that came into play. And as you see here, the treaty and agreements talk about education, but it's always who defines it. And I'm sure our people or my ancestors, wouldn't have agreed to something like this if they knew what it was actually saying. But already the United States government is asserting their supremacy over us by defining how we're going to educate our children. And a lot of my work, I tackle this type of stuff. In this one, the nihilism of the Black Stallion. I really connect with my dad and his teachings. He taught me traditional arts, but he was educated in boarding schools, and in particular, he was over in Pierre, South Dakota, at Pierre Indian School during the most of the 1940s. And he was telling me about his educational life at that time. He was put in a truck, like an army type of truck, and driven all the way with other students. They picked up other Indian students along the way in Fort Peck, on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. And I think it was about 600 miles from Harlem, or from Fort Belknap to Pierre, South Dakota. And he was there from 3rd grade till about 8th grade. And he was telling me one time they did a book report on, or he did a book report every year on the Black Stallion, the same book report, same write-up. And he was allowed to do that. And those are that's the kind of education that my dad and other Native people went through in the United States. And I think it did a lot of disservice to what our potential really could be. But nonetheless, he overcame that, and eventually, he became successful in the mainstream. And over there on the left is a zoom in on him, a representation of him reading the Black Stallion on a toilet, of course. And when I have, as much as my work seems kind of dark, but there's some humor in there too. And when I use this toilet imagery or outhouse imagery, it has to do with the story again of what he talked about on his boarding school days, when he used to have to deliver newspapers to white people's homes. And he saw these modern things like wall-to-wall, these different things, wall-to-wall carpeting that he didn't grow up with, or electricity, and even toilets that flush. So he figured, symbolically, I guess that's what success would be, getting these things. He's kind of, being sarcastic and questioning those things. But that's the kind of educational system our people went through. But in the late 60s and the 70s, and in our case, in 1983, our tribal colleges were founded on different reservations. And we, up at Fort Belknap, ours is called Ani Nakota College, and we're one of 35 tribal colleges throughout the United States. And these things, this type of education we wanted to define based on our indigenous life ways. And you see our mission statement, and I think I highlighted the key words: maintaining and revitalizing the indigenous life ways of the Ani, Nen, and Nakota. And throughout our programs, our degree programs, that foundation is throughout. In our values, even the signage on buildings. And, when I got there to Ani Nakota College in 2002, there wasn't that much in that on our campus. As you know, tribal colleges are come from very humble beginnings, and we're grant driven. So some of our foundation has to get on the back burner. But if leadership pushes it, it will happen. And so since in the last 20 years, we've embedded the campus with our life ways. Even, our students introduce themselves, that's a basic measure of their language capabilities. Even our instructors, both Indian and non-Indian, use language. We embedded our core curriculum with American Indian Studies general ed requirements. And we even, in 2011, we changed our name from Fort Belknap College to Ani Nakota College. And another unique thing we did at ANC is we have an immersion school for children about age, kindergarten through maybe 6th grade to 8th grade. And here's a picture of that first class that we started the first year. And there you see the elders, or elders at the time who are no longer with us, who spoke the language, or supporting them. But we just want to, that's kind of a unique thing that a tribal college would do, is educate children. So, and that's one of our goals, to go. I would like to see us have a high school within our college as well, but it all, like I talked about, it all depends on funding and the desire to have the teachers to do this. So I became president. I've been there since 2002. I've always had it in my mindset to, I always wanted to do something. And I mean, I was painting. Most of my work is painting, oil paint and oil paint sticks, some charcoal drawings. And I've always talked about the issues, and you name it, from, cultural genocide to our boarding schools, to actual genocide, to environmental genocide. Those were some of the subjects in my work. And I felt like I was missing something, that I was just talking about it. And yeah, I might be educating some people, but I felt like I needed to get out there more. So I furthered my education and acquired a master's in Native American Studies and later a doctorate in educational leadership. But in 2002, I pretty much quit art altogether, and to pursue this career in tribal college education. And I became president in 2020. And a couple of years before that, I resurrected my art career. And so now I spend late nights and weekends doing my art. And just like I said, just as I was kind of climbing back up in my art career, I became president, and really doubled my, tripled my work, I suppose. But yeah, I'm really glad I'm able to do these two, complete these two avenues of education, not just within my art, but educating on my home reservation and to my own people. And I think I better stop there, and I'll pass it on to Gerald Clarke.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate both y'all, and some really important work going on there. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and hopefully you can see my slide there. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity of speaking with you today. I'm talking to you from my office here at the University of California at Riverside, which is within the homelands of my people. And so I'm very fortunate that I can live at home on the reservation and commute in order to teach. And so I'm also really fortunate to be able to be included as one of the artists in the show that's currently up there at the National Gallery. And so the image that you see there is the catalog there on the left, a beautiful catalog that's been produced for the show. And then there's my contribution to the show there on the right, which is a 22 by 30, what I call a print. And what those are they're, as Gabrielle said in my introduction, I help run my family's cattle ranch here on the reservation, and on occasion I have to make branding irons. And I found that the best art I make is when it comes straight out of my own personal experiences. And so I was making these cattle brands. I was like, well, why don't I try to make a branding iron as a sculpture? And then from there, I was like, well, why don't I use it? And so that the image there you see of native art, and then the shape of the country there, that's all burned into watercolor paper. So it's actually branded, and not a traditional print, certainly, but I, what I do is I set up in my studio. My studio is right there on the reservation within my community, and I will heat up these branding irons. And I think I have a image there. You can see I make these branding irons. I use words, I use shapes and images, and then I heat them up and I burn them into paper. And I might do like 30 or 50 in an afternoon. And sometimes the branding iron's too hot and the paper just catches on fire. Sometimes it's not hot enough, it doesn't print quite well. And so I go through and I'll take maybe 2 or 3 from all those I did that day, and those are the ones that I will actually assign and frame. But I want you to know that I make a lot of bad art, I have to say. I've been doing this now for about 30 years. And I'm always trying new things. And again, I found that when I approach art just out of, regular life circumstances and my own experiences, it always seems to be better. And but I'm always taking risks, and always taking chances and trying something new. And I tell my students, like, if you're not failing in the studio, then you're probably not trying hard enough. You're probably not taking enough risks. And so I'm constantly pushing myself and trying new things. And that's what I bring into the classroom. And teaching is important to me. And I know the dominant culture, there's that saying, those who can't teach, right? And that's a really kind of Euro-American view. And it's in complete opposition to how my people think. And if you look at the Kuya creation story, someone who has experience, someone who has knowledge, it's a sacred thing to teach that. And it's often said that Native people, we're not born with rights, we're born with responsibilities and obligations. And that's, I love the fact that I'm living in my tribal community, and I can participate. I'm a traditional singer of bird songs within the community. And I've served on tribal council. So I've done a lot of different things. And my art is I try to bring it all in there, and I try to experiment as much as possible and try new things. And so I've been doing these branding iron prints now for a little while. Several years. And so there you see these branded prints. The image on the right, that's two different branding irons. So I have one that's just cut out of steel in the shape of my hand. Print those, and then let soak the paper in water a while. Then I'll come back and I'll use the word native or whatever. I combine them in different ways. And it's just, I like that to present the image, right, of a visual with the word, right, with the text, and have people kind of come to their own conclusions about what it is that I'm trying to do. Those of you who are in art history probably know J.J. Brody's book that was published in the 1970s. It was really one of the first art historical texts that actually considered Native American art as fine art. And in the book, he actually, concludes that it's actually the art market that led to a lot of really mediocre artwork being collected and put into museums or what have you. And so I made a branding iron of a dollar sign, and actually branded the cover of the book, not to criticize the book, but actually to amplify the message that J.J. Brody kind of came up with. And when you look at, you go to your local bookstore or library and you look for books about Native peoples and Native cultures, oftentimes they're written by non-Natives. And so I've done this with a number of books where I've actually branded the covers, and then I actually open it up to the title page, I sign it and date it, and now it's my sculpture. So I tell my students that's the ultimate plagiarism, but it's a way of taking this knowledge back. The university that I teach at, there's been a number of dissertations that have been published by students at this university. And that knowledge, when you think of California, you think of the gold rush and the mining, but the mining never stopped. Now our cultures are being mined by academics. And so I often tell my students, I have a bunch of graduate students right now, and we have a responsibility, obligation to make sure that we record this, what I call the indigenous intellectual tradition, and make sure to provide it back to the people. And so these are some of the things that I'm doing, and this is a related form to the branding iron, but this is where I take actual rubber stamps that I custom design, put little letters in, and then I stamp images. I use it as a drawing tool ultimately. So this is a self-portrait I did just a few years ago, and I just wanted to share with you the detail there. So actually, I stamped my self-portrait. I think this was done in 2016, and I did the words. It's all words that you see there. It's the names of the 7 most prescribed depression meds that year. And people will ask me, well, why would you do that? And one of the problems, I think, for me of being an academic and knowing the real history, not the history that we were spoon-fed in high school, but the real history is, it's a tragic history, and it's a weight. It's a weight that I carry into the classroom. It's a weight that I carry into the studio. And so, you know, this is what I'm trying to express with this work. Now, the Cahuilla people here in Southern California, on Pacific Standard Time, the art form we're historically known for is basketry, coiled basketry. And in the Cahuilla tradition, historically, this has been a gendered art. So this is an art that was created by women, okay? And please don't impose this kind of Eurocentric kind of hierarchy of men's work being better than women's work. We don't have that concept at all. It's a spectrum, okay? And so there you see the basket on the left, you see the 5-pointed flower, that's the tobacco flower, one of our sacred plants. And then the basket on the right, those triangular designs are basket designs for bats that would, you know, fly around at night and eat insects or what have you, right? So this was from the collection of the Palm Springs Art Museum, and they asked me to do a sculpture based on these baskets. And so this is a quick little sketch I did, just using my daughter's, Sharpies or what have you. And there I've combined the two baskets. So there's the tobacco flower in the center, and then the bats designs around the edges. And I put blue in there because bats come out at night, and the tobacco flower actually only opens at night. So I saw this kind of connection between them. And so the sculpture, and it turned out pretty close to the sketch. This is made out of over 1,800 crushed aluminum cans. So the green cans, right? Sprite and Mountain Dew, Rolling Rock. The black cans, I think, were like the Pepsi Zero or what have you. The blue was Bud Light. And so, again, the traditional coiled basketry was a women's art. And I respect those traditions and those differentiations. But also, I have to tell you that alcoholism has been an impact on my life, and it's an impact on my community. And diabetes has impacted my life and my community. And so the inclusion of the beer cans, the inclusion of the soda cans are referring to those issues that face, and a lot of Native communities face these days, okay? And so, you know, the dominant culture wants to romanticize Native cultures. And the last thing I want to do as a Native artist is to fall into that trap and romanticize my own culture. But so the issues, these are serious issues that are affecting people's lives, and it's in the work. But you know, when you get back, and I like to show this in museums where people see it from a little ways away, you know, it's a beautiful thing, just like my community. Here's a couple more that are in progress that I recently completed. And again, it's all beer cans and soda cans. And these are anywhere between 8 and 10 feet wide. And then this is a recent project where I actually created a land basket as part of the Desert X exhibition locally here in the Coachella Valley. And if you look at the image, the little red dot that you see there in the lower right area, that's me. So the whole thing is about 100 feet across. And it actually serves, you can walk on it and interact with it. And it's almost like a giant game board. And here you can see that it's immersed into the desert landscape here of Southern California. And so that's a little bit about my work. And I think we're going to turn it back to Gabrielle, and we're going to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, thank you. What a incredible spread to begin to inspire us with the questions. So I'm just going to take a look and see. Thank you all for these beautiful presentations. See if there's any questions coming up while we're waiting for that. Let me just go ahead and ask a question for the three of you. You know, when you're all coming from, like, I was really noticing lineages of art and community, and then going back into your home spaces and casting things out for upcoming generations. And I'm wondering if you could also talk about some of the challenges that you have with being in home space in terms of transmitting these values and artwork and encouragement for generations upcoming. What does it mean to be at home and really do this work on a daily basis?
Yeah, can I go? Do you mind? Let me just say that I had a cousin, I live on the res, and I had a cousin who said that every time they drive by my house, their kids like hang out the window to see what crazy thing I'm working on. And I absolutely love that, right? I want to be that influence in my community, right? So it's really important to me.
Yeah. Thank you. Keith, do you have comments? What is it? To speak more about what it means to be.
Well, I think that there definitely is going to be challenges always, because our communities are affected by many generations of different moments through their lifetimes and through inheritance as well too. But I think the biggest that I've always encountered is that there is a lack of appreciation for art until we really do get that encouragement that gives the enthusiasm of some sort of educator, somebody who usually is an artist who really does carry art close to their existence in their heart. And if they're able to share that open window, then the listener will often see that art has always been around them. It could be however they want to start to define it. And that's an empowerment. And we can then also bring in those ideas of sovereignty as well too. But really just seeing that, even a beaded lighter can be monumental to the holder, whoever is holding it in their hands.
Yeah, thank you. Sean?
Well, for me, I felt a little, kind of relief because, like I said, I mentioned earlier that I always wanted to contribute something positive to my people, much in the same, just in this modern era, the same vein as some of my great grandfathers and what they did to survive and do good things so that I could be here today. And so I feel good about that. And then, but at the same time, I know it's worth it. But at the same time, those challenges are there, the generational trauma, as you promote American Indian studies or Ani or Nakota studies, the language, we still, as a whole, kind of still suffer from that identity crisis that was caused by, U.S. government and churches and using their education or their style of education to indoctrinate us into somebody else and to define us as something else. And so we're trying to reverse that. And there's, there's pushback but I think we've come a long way, or at least I feel we've come a long way as an institution to overcome that in the last 20, 25 years or so. But I felt like doing art, I was kind of saying the same thing, trying to get it out there, but I felt it was still a little bit personal. It was more for myself. So that's why I wanted to go back and do something for other people.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question from our audience. And the question is, you are in your homeland surrounded by all that you know. Do you have any desire to go elsewhere?
I don't think I do. I mean, for a little bit here and there, but I love what I'm doing. I still say, well, if I become if I make a living off of art where I don't need, the day job, I guess, I would still do my day job. I would still, there's a lot of work that needs to be done and for others.
Can I say, my response to that is, there seems to be, again, this Euro-American kind of push towards this kind of globalism, right? And what worries me right now is the loss of local knowledges. So traditional ecological knowledge is based on the local, not on the global, right? And so, I've traveled around different places or what have you, but where I live in my home community there's no other place I'd rather be. Here at this, I teach at a big university, and I'm like one of the Indian professors, right? And I don't have to be that at home. I'm just a community member, and I can contribute to our community wellness. So I travel around, but I don't really have a huge desire to go around the world showing my work.
Yeah, I don't really have a huge desire myself, but I mean, there's some days where I do want to leave. There's some days when I want to stay home. I mean, especially in the wintertime, South Dakota gets pretty cold. But also we have a lack of a really decent galleries. You know, I do enjoy the gallery context as well as a painter, as a academic of arts. You know, I want to go in and I want to see the work and I want to critique the work. I want to have a critical experience with the art. And it's not always the same when you're trying to look at a book from your couch or getting on the internet from wherever you might be in a rural location. But I also think that you know, there has to be that responsibility and obligation. So I love that that was brought up as well too, because I think that that's eventually what Native artists will start to understand, is that, you know, this is truly what the inheritance is about. This is what the gift is of being a creative, is that I get to share this. And where do you get to honestly and authentically get to do that, you know, outside of your own home?
Can I say, like, it's a real privilege to be in this show there at the National Gallery. And, you know, I'm showing with a lot of my heroes, you know, John and Kay and George that are in the show. And they've been doing this for decades, trying to get contemporary Native art included into these major institutions. And I think, you know, they've been doing that now for decades. But now the question in my mind is, what have we gained? And I think it's you know, audiences, right? But also, what have we lost? Because I can tell you, I don't think anyone from my community is going to go to Washington, D.C. to see the show. And so going to, you know, what Keith was saying, we need more venues in our tribal communities where we can be professional artists showing our work in a professional manner where our own communities can appreciate it.
Such an essential point, right? These two questions: what have you gained? What do you use? What going into National Gallery? I think this next question, we'll just wrap with this one question from our audience. At least two of you mentioned that while you love and value education, it does take time away from your art. Any advice for other educators who are also trying to carve out time for art and community? And that question comes from Vivian.
Well, for me, I try not to think about the lack of time for my art. I just have to, no matter how tired you are, that I am, I do it. I mean, I did have the luxury this summer to do a 2-week residency where I took 2 weeks off of work, and I couldn't believe the amount of stuff that I completed. And I was thinking, wow, what if I had this time all year, how many paintings I could do, and like, you know, large scale that I was doing. But I try not to think about it too much because I know I got work to do for others. And but it just has to be done without thinking about it. Otherwise you think, oh, you know, you're already tired thinking about it, so just do it.
Any other response to this final question?
And with a real quick just comment, don't compromise your standards. I know that it's sometimes that we do really have a high expectation that we want to you know, stick to the script, but if that just means that you have to extend it longer, to just go with that. Don't let yourself feel like you're missing out on anything, because really the art world is vast, as we all understand, and there's always something new created each moment, each second maybe. And just kind of allow yourself to be reminded that that art is personally for you, unless you do have some sort of commission or agreement that you signed a contract maybe. Then you might want to just kind of find ways to be more efficient. So go back to your fundamentals. I mean, that really is the skill behind being an artist, and making sure that you're attentive to what those mentors, those ones who were talking to you and taking their precious time themselves out of their own practice to share with you, they were helping to make you understand that this is how you become proficient.
Thank you. Gerald, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I would just say I don't divide it all up. So like I'm in the studio like right now because I just learned a lot from the three of you, you know, And when I'm driving, I'm listening to podcasts and I'm thinking about my next piece. And, you know, I think it's, I try not to compartmentalize my life, right? It's all art, it's all ranching, it's all traditional culture. It's all, you know, it's just, I don't even think in those terms. But, you know, like I said, teaching is a sacred thing, and it's an obligation and responsibility that each one of us have to pass along the things that have been provided, you know, the wisdom that's been provided for each of us.
Well, I'd like to really thank the three of you and National Gallery for bringing us together and with the audience, and also just the feeling, the wisdom, the insights of what it means to be brought back into wholeness. And I think each of you really signals that, really brings us forward with that. It's really inspiring to leave us with those thoughts and to continue to watch your work and appreciate you. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending this tonight. This will be put up onto YouTube soon. Please go see the show if you can. It's up through January at National Gallery. So with that, I just want to say good evening and Manishi.